Morning, everyone. Very warm welcome to today's live webinar. I'm Lou Sallett. I'm Chief Executive of Cavell. For those of you that haven't heard of us, we are the UK's largest funder of nursing and midwifery professionals facing crisis. Today's session is inspired by the theme of International Nurses Day 2025, which is Our Nurses, Our Future, Caring for Nurses Strengthens Economy. So this theme highlights the importance of nurses' well-being and the societal and economical benefits of investing in the nursing profession. We'll cover how to meet some of those difficult but crucial conversations, how to champion self-care, morale, and how you can look after your own well-being in a leadership role, which is critical.
So the reasons that nurses and midwives apply to Cavell are many, but I thought I'd talk about three that seem particularly pertinent to that group of professionals. The firstly, sadly, is domestic abuse. Research has shown that nurses and midwives are 3 times more likely to experience domestic abuse than the general population. And the domestic abuse that our applicants experience cover the whole range of behaviours. It can be physical, emotional, sexual, financial, stalking behaviour, or coercive control. And that can either be currently happening as they apply to us. For example, they need help to leave the family home, or it can be the after effects of abuse, which can last many years. For example, the abusive partner withholding childcare in order to disrupt shift patterns, or the long-term mental impact on children, which means the applicant needs to change their hours to enable them to support the children. The second reason that we're seeing more and more applications from is health issues, and particularly mental health issues, often caused by burnout, by stress, anxiety and depression, whether over work issues or personal issues, which can lead to long-term illness and time off work, and also nurses and midwives questioning their ability to stay in the profession. While COVID is a distant memory, it seems, in the minds of the general public, it's still very real and having an impact on the mental health of nurses on a daily basis. And that can lead again to time off work, or nurses who don't feel that they're able to work the additional shifts that they've always relied upon to be able to provide for their families. And then the third issue is general financial pressures and debt. The demographic of the nursing and midwifery profession, which is predominantly female with dependent children, mean that a lot of those who apply to us are really struggling. And I think these pressures are particularly pertinent to the nursing and midwifery profession because applicants often have to live near a hospital, and that has associated impacts in rental costs. They have to access childcare, and the cost of that seems to be increasing on an almost daily basis. And then there are additional costs such as parking in hospitals, etc. So we regularly see nurses and midwives who are relying on credit cards and sometimes food banks to get through a month. And rent arrears leading to eviction are also a very real issue. So if I can pass on to Dion, do those chime with what you're seeing on a daily basis with your teams?
Thanks for that. Yes, I think it was really important that you mentioned COVID, because people seem to think that COVID has happened and it's ended. There's still an impact on staff at all levels, not just frontline staff. A lot of staff, I work in a corporate nursing team, and a lot of that staff has spent a lot of time supporting others, and that has led to some real challenges for people mentally and psychologically. The cost of living crisis chimes a lot as well. Nurses, midwives, and support workers, people particularly who work in cities, and I will quote London because I work in London, even though I don't live there. It is incredibly expensive to afford rent, and there are a lot of challenges to rent. Sadly, quite a few staff that I know of have had to seek support in terms of escaping domestic violence. And for some people, culturally, it's a difficult thing to do, and it has an impact on their lives in the future. And it saddens me really. And mental health is a real challenge for nurses and midwives, particularly those working in areas under constant pressure. So our staff in the emergency department, people think because you're an emergency nurse, you can cope with a crisis. But what we've seen in the last 3 years, it has been constant. And the final point I will make is restructure. Every time we think that we have settled in the NHS, there's another restructure. And every restructure, and obviously some recent announcements, have had a real impact on staff, and people are scared for the future. So I think it would be an opportunity to hear from Carl and to understand some of the common themes that he has seen with his work with nurses and midwives.
The three of my wonderful panelists have summarized everything so well. Something I'll bring from my experience, I'm lucky enough to work with nurses and midwives and healthcare professionals around the world. And there's something you notice with nurses and midwives are very driven, they're very passionate, they're very forward-thinking, they're very resourceful, and they are most often the first people in crisis situations to step forward. And I think it's easy to forget that nursing and midwifery in the UK was already facing crisis levels before the pandemic. We rode the wave, I say we, collectively, nurses and midwives, rode the wave of fellow feeling from the pandemic, where the general public, politicians and many others had a lot of respect and kind of good thoughts about nurses and midwives. Unfortunately, I think that wave waned. And we saw that with the response to the renewed actions with strikes and unions and advocacy for better conditions, staffing and pay. So I think one thing to kind of summarize with that is to remind ourselves that nurses and midwives are working under crisis situations. You're working in similar situations to people working in war zones. Of course, the stakes are less, the resources are different, the contexts are different, but the effect that it has on us, our bodies, our minds, our team members, our relationships is similar. And I think we need to take the time to respect that the work that nurses and midwives do is challenging, is stressful. I think we need to give ourselves the time to pause and process these things, not just mentally, psychologically, but in our bodies too. So that's what I would say is my insight from seeing it in around the world, and how that affects kind of UK bases of nursing. But I think it'd be interesting, Nancy, if you could maybe tell us a bit about, are there any particular types of people, or are there any particular groups of nurses, midwives, professionals that seem to be getting the short end of the stick?
So in the main, it's unilateral. And it has, as you said, Carl, it's gone on for a very long time. There are raised expectations from the public because of the very large-scale public inquiries, and therefore they are fearful, and therefore they take it out on nurses. So just because they're frightened, because they've read a lot. And nurses are absorbing all of this on a daily basis. But of course, the biggest concern is the culpability, because despite the fact we have PSERF and we have tried to eradicate blame, we are still seeing nurses and midwives being referred by the general public, but also their own organisation, with investigations not appreciating the considerable and significant amount of pressure that our workforce are under. And of course, you can imagine, just going back to what Alison was saying, that of course, if you are trying to manage your family, you're trying to feed your family, you may have, under that severe stress, be exhibiting a history of addiction. But actually, understanding each of the individual and what's driven them to this place is something that we don't do very well. And as a leader and a manager, it is about let's be kind, because actually making a referral to the Nursing Midwifery Council is not the answer. And I just want to say very quickly, because some of you will be wanting to hear what Dion has done in her area, and Carl. But certainly when I was chief nurse at the Norfolk and Norwich, we took nurses and midwives who had a condition of practice because we believed that we could put them through a programme and get them back into the labour market. And what I'm trying to do as part of my work, understanding and listening to the experiences of registrants, is get everybody to put packages around people with sanctions, because this is what we've made nurses and midwives put up with. Therefore, we shouldn't eat our own young. We should help our colleagues.
Thanks, Nancy. One of the things we hear most often when people apply to Cavell and we talk to them is they're embarrassed to have to access help from a charity. They never thought they were the, quote, type of person, end quote, who would need to accept charitable help. And whilst the pandemic has reduced some of that stigma, it's still very much an issue in people seeking help, particularly around domestic abuse. Nurses and midwives often say to me, I'm so embarrassed, I am trained to spot this in my patients, and yet here I am actually living that experience and not recognising it. Money, of course, is an incredibly difficult subject for a lot of people to talk about. And I do think people feel they will be judged if they say, for example, they're needing to access a food bank because it's the end of the month and they have no money. And finally, I think there's hopefully unreasonable but very real fear that discussing some of these issues with line managers may lead to assumptions about their fitness to work or their ability to work to the required standard. And so for that reason, I think they don't perhaps access the help or talk to their line managers that work in the way that they hope they would. It is worth saying that those nurses and midwives we talk to around domestic abuse who have talked to their employers and have accessed support have been magnificently supported by their employers, but they have to make that step and do it before that can happen. Carl, do you want to talk a bit about the traits you see in leaders who are most successful in supporting the well-beings of their team with those difficult conversations?
Thank you so much, Alison. It's really difficult to pinpoint specific attributes or traits because there's so many. The right trait or attribute depends on the person you're speaking to. I come from person-centered nursing as my kind of underpinning theoretical practice. Many of you will be familiar with that. I like to think of people-centered ways of approaching situations like this. So I'm going to focus on two aspects of that, if that's okay. But this isn't by no means saying if you do these two things, you'll always be successful. There are many other factors to it. The first one, I think, is a concept from the person-centered nursing framework by McCormick and McCann, sorry to get all referential, called the knowing self, which is one of their person-centered attributes and prerequisites. I think it's probably one of the most underserved elements of nursing practice and even person-centered nursing practice. And essentially, why I think it's a really good attribute is it tells you and gives you information about yourself. The more you know who you are, what things trigger you, what things you are drawn to, whether you're able to say no, for example, is a good one. People are very uncomfortable saying no, but that's sometimes something that's very important to do. And then that kind of flips over to knowing other people better and understanding who they are as a person, what makes them tick, what kind of things drive them, how many children they have at home, what's important about their day-to-day activity, why is it that they've come to you and asked for help, and why is that important to them? For example, if someone comes to you and say, I'm having a really difficult time, one of my pets has just died. Some people might not see that as a big deal. The person-centered approach of knowing yourself is knowing, well, that's not important to me, but this is important to that other person. I have to be careful that I'm not communicating to that other person that that's flippant, unimportant, or any of those other kind of things we might communicate unintentionally. We want to be very intentional with our communication, that we are supporting, we are there with, and we want to help as leaders. The second one is sympathetic presence, which also comes from the person-centered nursing framework, and it's one of the processes. This is something you can practically do. Now, this might open a can of worms, and I'm very happy to have that can of worms opened. But in the framework and in the literature, this is a response against empathy. Empathy is seen as the gold standard of care, but many practitioners discover, and many of the person-centered nursing theorists have said, that empathy is neither possible or desirable. I cannot feel the feelings of another person fully yet. Maybe one day we'll get there with technology. I can't feel the pain that Dion might feel at losing her pet. I can't feel the pain that Nancy might have with a broken shoulder or something like that. And I won't go to Alison. Let's not wish pain on any more people. And if I pretend to feel that same way or use my own experience to fill in those gaps. I might assume what that person needs, what that person is feeling. And crucially, it kind of moves us from this statement of I understand how you're feeling to I see and recognize how you're feeling and I'm here with you. And I think that's a really beautiful shift. And there's lots of research that empathy kind of leads to burnout, and compassion fatigue, empathy, interchangeable language. And there's something that kind of responds to that, and it's compassion. Compassion is an antidote to burnout, and empathy, taking compassionate action, helping others, the drive to help others. And that's actually what keeps many nurses and midwives going in the face of lots of crisis. So I could speak for a long time about those two elements, more elements of attributes and traits, but I would say those two are really powerful ones to do it. But I think kind of I've mentioned burnout, and that's a great kind of way to hand over to you, Dion, to tell us a bit more about how folks in leadership roles are kind of becoming stressed and burned out themselves.
So one of the things I do for anyone who's part of my team is look at what we call a wellness action plan. And that's a really useful tool to go through with members to understand what it looks like when they're well, what does it look like when they're not well physically and psychologically, and what are some of the triggers that I may need to be aware of so I can support them. I also need to role model, because I can't, people can't be what they can't see. And so I know for myself and my team, I had a really bad patch recently, and members of the team pick up on it. So I have to role model what that looks like. And that means shutting the laptop at 5 o'clock. It means having a break. It means looking after myself. And I think sometimes leaders forget that. They want to be everything and do everything. And that's why there's high burnout. I think it's really important to be able to speak to your staff members as well if you see them heading that way, and to understand what the things that impact on them, because very often people don't come to work as a nurse, a midwife, a support worker. They come to work as a nurse who is a mom of 3, or a nurse who may have a child with special needs, and that impacts on their experience at work. And I think it's really important for us to focus on that. Carl, I wanted to come back to you really with that point of view. So I wonder, for the people here who might be leaders, how could they support a member of staff in terms of their well-being, and how could they have that difficult conversation to be able to support colleagues?
The main advice I'd give is kind of ask yourself why you're concerned. Take a second to reflect. What is it that's causing that concern? Is it that you don't know that member of staff very well? Is it that thing that you suspect the person's going through, or have been told the person's going through, affects you as well? I mean, the most important thing is listening. And we advocate for a concept called listening well, which comes from William Miller, who was the founder of motivational interviewing. Some may be familiar, some not. I'd recommend you look into his practice. It means that instead of being there to offer a response, being there to offer advice, or even reassurance, or even agreement, gets in the way of listening well. And sometimes I think, not just as managers, as people, two people trying to hear each other and kind of come closer to understanding each other, we can jump ahead a bit too early to try to offer advice. And even agreeing, if someone's saying, oh, I'm really struggling today, it's been a hard day, isn't it? And you go, yeah, it has. You're not letting them express why it's been a hard day for them. You're kind of taking your viewpoint forward. That's one example. So those are the two kind of ways I would pinpoint. Know who they are. Three, I guess. Know who they are a bit more. Ask yourself why you're concerned, and then focus on listening well. Be that person that people want to come to because you're a good listener.
I think as nurses as well, nurses and midwives, we're great fixers, and we just want to go, do you know what? This is what I think you should do. But actually, we just need to provide a safe, psychologically safe room and environment to sit down with somebody. And because we need to know about them, because we're interested, that we can actually spend some time with them, that really matters. And we need to actively listen, so we don't interrupt, we don't advise, we don't guide, we just let them talk and reflect. One thing I would say is that as a manager, though, and a leader, it's really important that you do know all of the possibilities and options that you could help somebody engage with. They may not want to. So you do need to, and it might be some time, but it is important that we provide that rather than waste time going off to find it. And it is about summarizing, paraphrasing back what that person said so that they know that you're empathizing with them, but at the same time, you're not judging them. And I used to often think it was really odd many years ago when one of my leadership, sort of a leader colleague used to start all the meetings, and I was quite junior with, how is everybody today? Everybody, just tell me, what is it like? Just tell me, have you had a good weekend, a bad weekend, a good bank holiday? And we used to always start the meeting with a check-in, and I never understood why. And people used to sit in silence. But actually, as we all got to know each other as a team, it really felt with high camaraderie that actually the people around the table were interested about somebody else's problem or what had happened. So making time and listening properly with fascination is what we all need to do. You're going to go, how are we going to find time, Nancy? And that is always going to be the rub, isn't it? But we do need to make sure that that is not the first point that goes, that the team meeting doesn't go. Can I just say about that one-to-ones outside, there is so much work on neuropsychology about outside one-to-ones and meetings. And actually crunchy, difficult conversations are often less combative when they're outside. So there's so much work about the impact and on positivity of being outside, obviously not when it's, gale force and windy. So if we just think now, Dion, and I've talked a lot about busy roles, can you tell us about what you do, how you look after your well-being?
I have a commute into work, so I tend to get into work early, and I like to go for a walk. I just remember when I joined this trust in the middle of COVID, and I remember the CEO used to say, "Why are you walking around the car park every morning talking to yourself?" It's like, no, I start my day with a walk because I do a lot of driving, and I'm a Christian, so sometimes it becomes a prayer walk, and hence the talking to myself. And I find that helps to ground me for the morning. And I make a real effort to have a lunch break when I'm not looking at the screen. And we know how busy it is in the NHS, and that's really difficult. Because again, for me, it's about role modeling for the team. I make sure I have regular breaks. And nurses and managers who love to go to break and leave and do emails, work will exist without you. One of the things COVID taught me is that people disappeared and they were replaced. You cannot support a team, you cannot lead a team if you're not looking after yourself. So sending emails until midnight, and when you're on leave and whatnot, stop it. So I when I'm on a weekend, and this is hard because by nature I'm a workaholic, I stop. Sure, Carl has some exercises.
So I'm going to quickly share one activity. I mentioned journaling. I do something called creative personal reflection. The attentive people might notice that stands for CPR. I think creativity can keep us alive just as much as cardiopulmonary resuscitation. I practiced that in the mirror this morning, and just to play on words. One of the ones we do is about gratitude. Gratitude is an incredibly powerful trait that we can access. It's got direct correlation links to well-being. One of the most simple CPRs we do is ask you to write what are 5 things you're grateful for today. And there's nothing too small and there's nothing too big. Maybe you could do that in your check-ins before you start, or at the end of the day with your staff and colleagues. Ask them all to write 5 things they're grateful for. For me, I personally have a principle that we don't share CPR because the P is important, it's personal. And sometimes when we do reflective writing or writing, there's an impulsion to share, which actually means you hold something back. So I personally keep that back. But if you wanted to incorporate kind of sharing elements with your team, that's helpful too, to hear from each other what you're grateful for.
So I am going to just draw it to close and move to the Q&A now. There's been a number of questions, but I think we've picked up quite a lot of them in what we've spoken about. So somebody very kindly has said, and they didn't leave their name, is there anything I can do to help Cavell? The thing that we'd like you to take away from today is let your colleagues know that we're here. That's the most important thing that you can take away from today. Obviously, there are all manner of things that you can do above and beyond that. You can, get involved with fundraising. You can nominate someone for a Cavell Star Award. You can explore the Working With program. But yeah, just helping us be there for the nursing and midwifery professions is the most important thing. So thank you for being a part of our event for International Nurses Day. I hope you're taking some of these conversations and practical skills away with you, spreading around the teams. But I think what we've learned is applying them to yourself as well, because that's the only way you can really be there for others. We are Cavell, and you can contact us and follow up on anything that you've listened to today. So don't be a stranger. But this would not have been the event without our wonderful panelists. So Dion, Nancy, Carl, and Alison, thank you so much for making this such an interesting session. Take care, celebrate International Nurses Day because it's an important day and you're very important. Thank you.